Yes, Bombers fans, I'm sure it's been a crap few weeks, but we're going to pick over the list. We're going to have a look at all of the options with this list, every player assessed, what we can do with them at the end of the season. We're going to look at the draft options for the Bombers, delistings, trades, all of that kind of stuff in this video. So if you're interested, keep watching and we'll get stuck into it now. Okay, so a quick overview on the Bombers here, and I want this to sort of, anchor it a little bit because I think this is where the list is, this is where the talent is at. So at the moment, the average age is 26, the sixth oldest in the competition. Average games are sixth as well on talent, and that's based on AFL ranking points, the individual player ranking points. Essendon are ranked as the seventh best team on those. And I feel like that's kind of something just to keep in mind as we watch the video, because I feel like that's around about where Essendon should be at the moment. I think early season was probably an overachievement, and now we're getting through and it's perhaps leaning into that underachievement, which is what Bombers fans have experienced for the last few years with these kind of late season fade outs that are a little bit inexplicable. And I think there's such an interesting case study for that question of development versus recruiting, and are you bringing through the talent that's at that top end and it's just not getting better? Or are the players not good enough to begin with? And I think if you go back through Essendon's drafting, there starts to become a pattern where they are bringing in some pretty good players, but for whatever reason, they just don't reach that top level. You look at, back to 2015, which is starting to become largely the nucleus of this current team. Parrish with pick 5. They missed with Francis at pick 6. Would have loved to have got a Kernow or a Mackay with that pick, but missed there. But Redman with pick 30 is a really, really high-level player, and he's come on pretty well. Probably hasn't quite elevated himself to that absolute top level. We looked at 2016, you got Andy McGrath with pick 1 and Jordan Ridley with pick 22. And I reckon Ridley's the best player in that draft. So you've got him, and then you've got a smaller running defender in McGrath. You got Draper that year as your, really highly talented ruckman now. 2017, you got Adam Sard, who's a gun player, obviously not with the club anymore, but a gun. Then you got in the trade period, Devon Smith, Jake Stringer, Matt Guelphy with pick 76. So another draft player there with, who's done really well. He's come into this team and he plays a role. 2018, Dylan Shield comes in, another already established quality player at the Giants. And there just hasn't been enough of those players go on to be like A+, that, top level player, someone to go alongside Zach Merritt. Zach Merritt's really an outlier that's got to that absolute top level. I think Jordan Ridley's close. He's probably your second best player to Merritt, but it's been really difficult for players to elevate themselves to that upper echelon of, most highly talented players in the AFL. We'll have a look at the stats here because I think the stats kind of narrate a game style that Brad Scott's tried to implement since coming in. I think a lot of the game style with Essendon is about protecting certain deficiencies within the list, I could say, I guess. So the big takeaway from if you start looking into Essendon stats, you see that they're a big uncontested possession team. They like to hold onto the ball and they like to defend with the ball, and they suffer a little bit when it comes to the contested possession numbers. Now, they rank in terms of differential as the 8th best team, so they're kind of mid-table with contested possession differential, but when you take a look at their total number of contested possessions, they come in at 13th. So what that tells me is they don't have a lot of contested possession in their game, and that's partly because they like to control the football. So they don't have as many contests, they don't have as many tackles even, and those sorts of things. So low contested possession games for the controlling style. They rank number 1 for total uncontested possession and 3rd for uncontested possession differential. So that's their lot. That's the way that they want to play. They want to control the football. They also have, just to tie into that narrative if you're interested, they have the least amount of meters gained per possession. So that kind of shows the short chipping game style compared to a, kicking long down the line. So he's working within his assets. Why do I think he wants to keep the ball away from the contested situations? Probably is that, most of your contested possession breakdown comes from ground ball, and Essendon has a lot of sort of oversized players. He's like to use those wingers like Harrison Jones, like Nick Cox, big oversized players, running players, but players that are better aerially. I think the problem with how they've implemented those wingers this season has been that they haven't really given you that much aerially either. So I think there's a problem there. I want to talk about that in this video, particularly with some positional changes with, the likes of Cox and Jones maybe going to auxiliary roles and other players coming in there. So we'll get into that as well in a second. The scoring end of the ground is interesting. You're 13th for offensive one-on-one, so there is a lack of contest winning. I think Jake Stringer's got the best numbers there. He's been really good this season. But then what do you do with these tall forwards? And that's one of the questions. Do you go with a Harrison Jones? Do you go with a Kyle Langford? All of those things, the dynamics of that forward line. I think part of the offensive one-on-ones not being a high number, it's also to do with the ball movement. I talked about that slow ball movement, the uncontested possession style. That makes it harder to convert your inside 50. So that's an interesting one as well, but that can also be fixed a little bit with player power. If you get some big contest winners in there, and you do have a couple of options there coming up in the draft as well. We'll touch on the defense quickly, the last line we haven't really spoken about. The Bombers don't particularly defend, defensive half transition. Teams can move the ball pretty easily at times against the Bombers. And probably the most worrying stat is just the high percentage of losses of one-on-one contests in that defensive D50. As I said, it partly does stem from the defensive transition, and that's a big part of that's the midfield, but players like Harry Mackay, even Jordan Ridley, Laverde, they lose too many one-on-ones at the moment. That needs to be, tightened up. And I think that's partly the system just getting a little bit better, and it's a little bit of more quality around the ball as well, and just a bit more defensive stability, I guess. So that was a pretty long start to the video. We'll get into the main nuts and bolts of it now, which is going through, I'm going to break it down here into key defenders, small defenders, your midfielders, your wingers, and sort of line by line with, your talls and smalls across those lines. And we'll kind of look at every player. We'll say what we think should happen to them, where they should be playing, etc., if they even should be moved on, for example. So we'll start with the tall defenders, which Essendon actually have a pretty good stacking of tall defenders if you have a look at it now. So first one there on the list is Ben Mackay, who I think really should be the guy that you're building this defence around. He's kind of your centrepiece. He takes the gorilla. He's the main lockdown defender. He does do a little bit of intercepting as well. As I said, they need to find a system that protects these guys enough that they're not losing 35% of defensive one-on-ones. I think the other issue with Mackay is the ground ball numbers, which means that you need to play some smaller guys around him. You can't have too many, 200 plus centimetre guys down there that can't pick up the ground balls, and they get exposed by teams like your Hawthorns and those Mosquito Fleet type small forward lines. So Mackay is so important to this team. I think he was a good pickup for them. I think he does give them that really big-bodied tall defender that every club needs, and they had to go for him. I think he's been pretty good this season, particularly in the front half of the year, but just hasn't had the back end of the year that you needed. I think we move on to the second defender, which is Jordan Ridley, who I think this guy is one of the premier key defenders in the competition. I think if he was playing for a top four side, he would be considered to be one of the best defenders. He's a triple threat. He's got the diffusing, the intercepting. He's got the distribution as well, which not many key defenders have, and he can lock down on players. He has the athleticism to go with some of the best forwards in the comp. Here are some of his stats for the season. He's gone at 21 disposals, 400 metres gained, which is big for a key defender, 90% disposal efficiency. So he's gaining that amount of meterage with that disposal efficiency, so using the ball really well. And his one-on-one work, although it's not competition really good, it's 10% better than any other defender at Essendon. So that's something for Ridley to hang his hat on, and that kind of shows you that it is kind of system-based, a lot of this stuff as well. The one that I've got there as the third tall, I want to try to shrink this defence just a little bit, and rather than go with the 193 centimetre Laverde or someone like a Lewis Hayes, who I'll talk about in a second, who's really killing it in the VFL at the moment, I've got Jake Kelly here, and I know this one's probably a little bit divisive for Essendon fans. I just think at the moment, just the size of him is kind of a good size to be able to take those medium to smallish kind of forwards, your Toby Greens, your Cam Zerha type players. He's done some pretty good jobs on those players throughout the season, albeit 40% losses of one-on-ones is not really a stat to cry home about. And his contested possession rate is only 2.5 per game, which isn't up there with the these medium-sized defenders like himself. So he's definitely got some deficiencies, but he has been able to, at least from a goal scoring point of view, be able to handle some of those forwards. And I think from a structural point of view, being able to lean on him as that medium type defender, it's pretty handy to have. So I think for sure in the best 22 starting lineup, he's going to be swapping with someone like a Laverde. Even if you want to go a little bit smaller again, you could probably not play the third key tall, and you could go to some of your smaller defenders that we'll get to as well. Laverde's next, and he's had an okay season. Again, he has that defensive one-on-one deficiency, and just Essendon's inability to be able to deal with ground ball in the back half. He's kind of been a part of that. That's why I've gone with Kelly as the number 3 guy. I think Laverde can just sort of sit in the VFL. He can swap when you need to, when you're up against a more tall opposition forward line, he can come in, but he'll just sit there in the VFL and be, good backup if one of these guys goes down as well. Lewis Hayes, he's just developing nicely. I went to the Gold Coast Essendon VFL match at the weekend, and he was just fantastic, I thought. Intercepting absolutely everything. I've got some numbers from the game. He went at 100% disposal efficiency. He had 5 intercepts. He had 5 score involvements too as a tall defender. He's 199, so he's pushing 200 centimetres, 8 marks. Many of those were intercepts, and that back 6 for the Essendon VFL team, they were really fluid, looked really good in there. So I love him, but just probably not ready to be the absolute starting key defender at the moment for the Bombers. The next one is Wiedemann, and I've read some stuff where Essendon fans have wanted to delist Wiedemann. I think, 27 years of age, I don't think you get much for him from a trade capital point of view. 197 centimetres, do you just keep him there? And if, Ridley has been pretty injury prone, so, he can come in, play a role. He's a big-bodied, good key defender at, reasonable key defender at AFL level, so pretty good as a backup player. I think you keep him there. The other one is Zach Reed, who just hasn't really had a run at it with his body. He's the 202 centimetre defender. He was a higher end draft pick a couple of years ago, and as I said, hasn't been able to get his body right. Pectoral injury is the latest setback, and he's only played 1 game this season, so I think you have to keep him around, as is the talent level. I mean, there'd be a bit of an option there to trade him, as he'd probably still 202 centimetre defenders don't grow on trees, but I don't know if clubs would be willing to pay too much for him because they just haven't seen him play enough football. And the last one on the list, which feels very harsh, but I think Kane Baldwin, who suffered a navicular injury this season. He's been out for pretty much the entire season, I believe. Hasn't played AFL footy for a while. I think it was 2021 that he came onto the list. So I think he's up for a delisting at the moment. They've got to clear 3 list spots at least to get these new draftees in the door. So I think Kane Baldwin probably goes at the end of the season. Then you've got your medium to small defenders, and topping that list is Mason Redman. He's 27 years of age, 187 centimetres, played 121 games now. He's been an excellent player for the Bombers. Really good numbers. His intercept marking, particularly lately, I think has been really good. He's perfect as that sort of 3rd or 4th, almost a tall defender. And again, someone that can match up on some of those really awkward height forwards, or if a mid that's pushing 190 centimetres pushes forward for the other team, Redmond's the sort of player that can go with them and even hurt them on the other way. I think he and Ridley strike up a really good balance of that attack versus defence. Mason Redman for me, particularly last season, I think it was his best season last season, but one of the Bombers' best players and a big part of this, next few years as well. Andy McGrath gets a lot of hate, 26 years of age, 180 centimetres. He gets a lot of hate because he was a number 1 draft pick, but he's actually a really, really good player. He's Essendon's best one-on-one small defender. Wins most of his one-on-ones. He's big for metres gained and efficiency, so he gets out of that back half. Again, I preface that with saying that Essendon's game style does give higher disposal efficiency, but, he still does his job. He's really competitive. I think he tries really hard, and, he's probably just not a player that's sort of born to be a leader like Essendon fans really want him to be and what's expected of him at the club. But I think as far as his performance on field, he does his job pretty much week in, week out. So him as that kind of, one of your running defenders, but also a player that can more lock down. And then I've got the big one here. The last name on this defensive back 6 on the field sort of list is Saad El Hawley. Now, I told you I went to that Gold Coast versus Essendon game, and he was magnificent in that game. So I'll read off these disposals for you. 21 disposals, 9 intercept possessions, playing a wing sort of half-back role here, 10 score involvements, and he kicked the goal himself. He was absolutely everywhere. The 21 disposals doesn't do him justice. Again, he wasn't taking kick-ins or any of that, so there's no defensive junk. It was all up high. It was all along that half-forward line, kicking the ball inside 50, taking shots. And I reckon he would have already played senior football. It's crazy to think that he hasn't played a game of senior football after he was taken in the mid-season draft, but he had that injury pretty much after his first VFL game for the Bombers. So he's huge for the future, this guy. An absolute gun, only 23 years of age. So Bombers fans, get excited about Saad El Howley. If Heppel does choose to retire and you're going to play that last defender, I think you're looking at someone like a Lual who's been playing VFL. He's certainly a bit raw at the moment. Not someone that's going to come in, I wouldn't have thought, and have a huge impact, but he's been playing, actually, to be honest, he's been playing forward in the VFL at the moment, so whether that's something they also do with him, but he's an option as another one of those running halfback players, and if he can have a bit of defensive stability to his game, someone that definitely could come in and play a role. The last one there is Nick Hind, who is playing VFL at the moment off halfback, and he's probably good enough to be playing AFL, isn't he? It's tough. He gets big numbers in the VFL, but I don't know, do you have to move past these guys at some point? He's 30 years of age, just played the 15 games this season. So I'd probably rather see Lual in there, if I'm honest. But if it's Heppel, if it's Lual, one of those players at the moment. I think when you start to read down these smaller defenders, you do realise what a masterstroke it was taking Saad El Howley in that mid-season draft. He looks like the perfect player. And what this facilitates, and we'll get into this with the midfielders in a second, but it facilitates Nick Martin to the wing role, which he, in my opinion, is much better at. I think when he's getting the ball forward of centre, along that half-forward line, he's much more damaging than what he is just accumulating in the back half of the ground. So, Saad El Howley, what an astute pick up there by the Bombers, and one that can really help them, particularly into the 2025 season. So we finally get to the midfield, and I mentioned it off the top about the oversized wingers, and I don't think that's really working. The ground ball numbers for Essendon are pretty bad, and when you've got most of the season, it's really been Caldwell, Merritt, Parrish has run through there, Shields been through there, and then it's sort of Durham. You should really be getting good ground ball return from those kind of guys. I don't think Essendon are getting enough support from their high half forwards or their wingers at ground level at the moment. Some other teams are getting, much bigger numbers out of, look at Hawthorn, for example. I keep using them, but Dylan Moore, he gets up the ground really well. McDonald, they get in there and they help out with those ground ball numbers to kind of fill out the midfield a little bit more. So I'll go to my midfield starting three, or what I think it should be going forward for the 2025 season at least. So obviously Merritt's in there. He's your captain. He's your best player. He's really the only Essendon player that is rated in the top sort of 20 players in the competition. I think partnering him has to be Sam Durham. I know there's been calls for him to play forward, but I just think he's such a good midfielder. He gives you so much more bite in at the stoppages. He gives you quality clearances where he comes out, he tears out of the stoppage and, has that burst to get out the front of the stoppage. And he also gives that really good defensive stability, as does Jai Caldwell, who I think is going to be one of the main three in there for Essendon going forward. He's really good from a defensive point of view, but he also gets, forward with his score involvements, which are really high for him. I think the fourth one that has to be playing in there is Elijah Sartis, who's been playing really good football at VFL level. Pick 5 in the 2022 draft. Sartis is a smooth, outside-looking midfielder, but he does have really good contested and really good clearance numbers at VFL level. Gets his hands dirty, has nice movement, he has nice ball use, and he's a player that Essendon really need. I think, and obviously you can see from this that players like Parrish and Shield have been left out of the team here. I think, Sartis compared to Parrish, it's just that ball use factor. For Parrish, it's just, it's a lot of handballing. It's a lot of just giving the ball to Merritt. He wins his clearances, but are they quality clearances? I'm not too sure. I think, again, it comes down to that word of balance. And when you've got Merritt in there, you've got Parrish in there, you've got Shield in there, the midfield it's very small. It's quite one-paced, and just having a player like Parrish that really only provides you that clearance winning ability and sort of accumulation ability, you don't have enough guys in there that give you that power, give you that pace, give you that athleticism that someone like a Durham and a Perkins give you as well, who will be in the team later down the track here. So for me, it's Merritt, it's Durham, it's Caldwell, and it's Sartis going forward. You've then, what do you do with the rest of the guys? So you've got Archie Roberts. I think he's going to play on a half forward flank or on a wing going forward. We've got him there in the list of midfielders. Parrish, do you try to get some trade capital? I think you do. I think you try to get rid of him. If you can get a pick inside the top, 20, 30, that sort of range, I think you've done pretty well there, and you can use it to be able to get the maximum amount of value in this 2024 draft. Dylan Shield, I think you move him on in any capacity that you can. He's played 6 games this season. I know he's got himself back into the team, but I don't like the mix. It's more about the mix than actually not liking Shield or Parrish here. So I just want to reiterate that as well. Will Setterfield's a tough one. I don't think he's, as a big-bodied mid, he's 192 centimetres. He's only 26 years of age. He gets big numbers in the VFL, but his contract is up in 2024. He's played 4 games of footy this season. I'm just not sure. If you're a big-bodied mid, you've got to have some real standout attributes to your game, and I'm not sure Setterfield has really much outside his just sort of accumulation, his ball-winning ability. So he's an interesting one. I think he's one that you can move on from as well. We'll talk about that when we get to the end of the players. Now, the wings are where I want to do probably the most shake-up here. I mentioned Cox and I mentioned Harrison Jones not getting it done. Here's some of Nick Cox's numbers. 12 disposals per game, 150 metres gained, 60% disposal efficiency, half a contested mark. That's probably the most damning in this list of statistics. 2 score involvements and 2 ground balls per game. So you get no ground balls, you get half a contested mark, and you get 60% disposal efficiency, which if you're playing, I know he has played different positions, so he's been flung around the ground. He's even played as a key defender, so that does hurt his numbers a little bit. But I think even with that, there is a level of uncompetitiveness at the moment with Nick Cox. Such an athletic profile, and one that at the moment just isn't putting it together. So I think you either have to, again, look for trade cachet with Cox, or you have to put him in the VFL, try to work on elements of his game so that he can, somehow find some form and get back into this team going forward. Jones, a little bit the same, but I'm a bit more optimistic with him. I think he can play a forward role. He can come in off the bench, play a little bit of wing, play a little bit of half forward as a key forward. He's got that height, 196 centimetres. I don't think it works as a pure winger. I think that's where we've got to bring in guys like Nick Martin back to that role. We've got to bring in Xavier Dersma too, who's played 15 games this season. I think Dersma's been quite underrated for the Bombers this season. He hits the scoreboard as well. He's still 186 centimetres and Martin's 192, so you've got plenty of height in that wing, 24 and 23 years of age. The wings in modern football are such an important position to be able to get up and back down the ground, but also to be able to use the ball inside 50 to hit up those targets, and I think Martin's going to be particularly important with that. I think Dersma's ability to, get forward and take a grab as well is really important. He's got that, vertical leap on him as well. So that's what I would be doing with the wings, which then moves us to the forward line. And this is a really interesting part because I think Essendon for most of this season have been playing slightly too tall. Players like Peter Wright, they don't provide enough defensive pressure or enough ground level presence to be able to, kick a winning score really and just be dangerous when the ball gets inside 50. That's why they've had poor returns at creating inside 50s but not being able to finish the job. It's part of that at least anyway. So I'm going with Kyle Langford. He is the best forward at the moment, at least from a numbers point of view. He has the most goals for the Bombers and the most score involvements, rated number 1 at the club. So he's doing a fantastic job and really fulfilling what he's there for. I think you've got to progress here with, or persist with Nate Caddy as their most talented key forward. Got the Rising Star nomination, not won it, but got the Rising Star nomination this week, showing off his talent. His under-18 year was fantastic, and he just looks like a really natural key forward, jumps at the footy, takes contested marks, and seems to have a pretty good understanding of the game for a first-year player. So he's got to be there. And this is where I would get pretty ruthless with the forwards. I wouldn't be playing the likes of Peter Wright in there. Harrison Jones, I think, can come in and play a little bit, but the third tall I would be playing after Caddy would just be Jake Stringer as that sort of tallish medium forward, less of a marking target, more of a ground level threat, more of that, forward of centre punishing player. But what that means is you can play a Harrison Jones off the bench. He can come in, play a little bit of forward and a little bit of wing and just give you some flexibility because, if a tall goes down during the game, Jones can kind of fulfill that role as well. That allows you to be really, really flexible with your small forwards. We'll get to those in a second. I just want to go through some of the other key forwards to talk about them. You've got Vicentini, who is a mid-season draftee. I think he looks really good in the VFL at the moment, does Vicentini. He's only 19 years of age. He can just stay there, develop for a little longer, 203 centimetres. So, a lot of potential in that pick. And the last one is Jaden Hunter, who just needs to play some footy with that ACL that he's had this season. He was a mid-season draftee in 2022. So the time's starting to add up for him without playing any senior football, but you probably just want to take a little bit more of a look at him. To be honest, I have no evidence of anything on him, so I won't talk too much about him. We then get to the small forwards, so I want to play more small forwards in this lineup and make Essendon more dangerous at ground level. I think Ben Hobbs can play a high half forward role, get up to stoppage. As I said, they need help in that ground ball differential role, getting up to stoppage and being more of a help in there. Hobbs can do that. He's a good runner. He's got good power too, so he does help with those around the ground stoppages. Perkins can be a half forward as well and rotate through the midfield. At different times this season, without putting all of the consistency together, Perkins has looked like an absolute A-grader. I think he's a fantastic player, a really nice size midfielder, and gives Essendon something a bit more dynamic and something a little bit more different. And then the other small forward there is Matt Guelphy, who probably doesn't get the plaudits that he deserves, but he's averaging the highest amount of goals of all of Essendon's smalls. I think he's the best role player. He gets up, he tackles. He does get involved in those around the ground stoppages as well. And he just works. He works to, release teammates, get other players involved in the game. So Guelphy has to be cherished and has to be held onto, I think, in this team. And then as the small forward on the bench that can come in and rotate with those players, I've got Isaac Kako, who obviously comes into the Essendon team this season with the new NGA rules. He is a punishing, dynamo little player that when the ball hits the ground inside forward 50, he is absolutely lethal. He's everything that you want Jade Gresham to be this season, which brings me to Jade Gresham, who I don't think is defensive enough. I think he's too much of a ball-playing player and doesn't have enough impact on games. He's not really a role player. He's more of a see ball, get ball player, but that's not really happening too much for him this season. I'd be pretty happy to move Gresham on. It's not like, I don't think he's a terrible player by any means, but I think with, having players like Kako come into the team, you've still got Alwyn Davey Jr. there as well, and you've got players like Menzies as well. What do you do with all of these players? I think Gresham's just too much of a cherry on top luxury type player, so you can move him on. Alwyn Davey absolutely needs to elevate his game. He's not doing enough from a defensive point of view. He's not high enough on the score involvements for a small forward or hitting the scoreboard himself. So he's someone that may need to play a little bit of VFL football, especially with Kako coming in. I think, Kako could be a player that comes in and is above him already. Menzies, I can't fit him into the best 23. I think he does some nice things at times, but I don't know if you can rely on him, and I don't think you necessarily want him in your best 22 at the moment, or 23. And the last one there of the small forwards, who is Tex Wanganeen, who's been playing a little bit off half back with the VFL side. I think he's probably the one that has to get delisted from this group. He's been on the list since 2021. You need to delist a certain amount of players at the end of the season, like I said, and he's just a bit of an obvious one to me. He doesn't look like, he just doesn't have that sort of AFL look when you watch him in the VFL as well. He's not really dominating at that level. Has played some okay stuff, and he was okay off halfback, but you got to move some players on. He's probably the one that I'm picking out of that group at the moment. The other one there is Jaden Davey, and I probably put him in a similar boat to Tex Wanganeen. Hasn't, from what I've seen of him at VFL level, without watching every single game, but the games I have seen, hasn't really lit that competition alight. He still failed to play an AFL game, drafted in 2022 with pick 54. So he's definitely one that could be on the chopping block. I reckon the team's looking at moving him on at the end of the season to open up some new list spots. We'll quickly touch on the Rucks, which I think is pretty simple. I think Goldstein retires at the end of the season to open up a spot. Then you've got Draper and Bryan. You're obviously playing Draper as the number one ruck. Don't like Draper as a forward, so then what do you do with Bryan? Do you just leave him as backup? Do you try to give him some football in the ones? And I haven't really seen enough of Bryan as a forward to really, have too much of an opinion on that as well. So I think at this point, you probably play Draper as the number one ruck. If anything happens to Draper, you've obviously got, ample backup there with Bryan in the team as well. So that's how I would be doing that with, Bryan as an emergency at this stage. So I've essentially gone through my best 22 there. I'll put that up in a second. Now, we'll just quickly go back over the players that I've retired or delisted here for Bombers fans. I think they do have to get a little bit ruthless here with some of these calls, try to recycle the list. I think there is a bit of a cultural revolution happening at Essendon under Brad Scott. So again, like I said, not all doom and gloom. I think Goldstein will retire at the end of the season. The delistings for me are, the certainty ones at least, for me are Jaden Davey, Kane Baldwin, and Tex Wanganeen, who you're moving on from the side to refresh that and just get some new faces in there. Trades, I'm looking at Darcy Parish and Peter Wright. I think they've still got some trade value there and can open some things up for you in the draft. We'll get on to the draft now. So we know that Essendon have Kako in the bag. He is coming to Essendon. So they've got pick 9 at the moment. So pretty much by my calculations, I don't think a bid comes for Kako before pick 9 at this stage, which means technically their pick at the moment, if they were to stay in that latter position, they're actually ahead of the Kako bid, which means they can pick a high quality player inside the top 10 of the draft with that pick 9, and then they can also get Kako as well. So you're getting two really top 15, top 20 players for one. The only issue with that is Essendon only have pick 29. That would get eaten with the Kako bid, and then they would have to find more points with some other draft picks that they don't have at the moment. So they'll have to look to trade future picks, or like I said, with some of those players that they look to move on, maybe a Parish, maybe a Peter Wright, maybe they can get some trade value there and then put that towards the Kako bid. The players that I would be looking at for Essendon are really just those. I mean, you're looking at talent. With a pick 9, you're certainly looking at talent. I think Essendon have drafted a little bit too heavily with those oversized utility, I don't know what you call them, mids, like players like Cox, like Harrison Jones, that are a little bit utility type players that haven't got a defined position. So I'd be just looking at the footballer types, the ones that can play midfield, forward, be really damaging and really punishing inside forward 50. So the two that will sit around that pick 9 for me are Harvey Langford from the Dandenong Stingrays and Sam Lawler from GWV Rebels. Now, Langford's a 190 centimetre mid. He's drawn comparisons to Jordan Dawson, and I think that's a pretty good comparison. A left footer, big body, 25 disposals a week and a couple of goals is a pretty standard day at the office for Langford. I think he'd accompany the likes of Merritt, of Cordwell, those smaller bodied mids really well. And then you'd have your Durhams and your Perkins who are coming through there as well with a bit bigger bodies and a bit more athleticism. So I think Langford's a really good one, but even better than Langford would be Sam Lawler. He has a real Dustin Martin look to him. He's really nuggety. He bursts out of congestion. He's a real fast twitch athlete. Quite a lot of speed when he gets going, and he has that burst, like I said. So the other big thing with Lawler is his ability to go forward and take a grab, but also really strong in that ground ball area, which Essendon need. And again, you throw him in, he's a 187 centimetre sort of mid-hybrid forward. So you throw him into that midfield mix and he just gives you something different, a more powerful player that your Parishes and your Shields aren't. So I like both of those picks if Essendon do end up with that pick 9 and there is no bid for Kako. That's what I would be doing if I was Essendon at the moment in the draft. We'll just quickly look back over that lineup that I just put out, how I think the team could be heading into the 2025 season. So here is the best 22 for the 2025 season that I've gone with. So your tools there across the back line, Ben Mackay, Jordan Ridley and Jake Kelly. Again, went with Kelly there as that sort of third tall. He can take those medium-sized defenders. Then for your smalls at ground level, you've got your Andy McGrath, Mason Redman, and Saad El Howley. He's going to be your attacking threat with ball in hand. Across that sort of midfield line there, the two wingers that I've changed, Nick Martin moving up onto the wing, getting higher, with Sam Durham as just that X-factor midfielder, gives you something a little bit different. Xavier Dersma on the other wing, I think he's doing a great job there when he's played there. Then your talls, I've gone with Kyle Langford, Nate Caddy, and Jake Stringer as the third tall. And then for your small forwards, Archie Perkins, Isaac Kako, and Matt Guelphy. So I think that's a nice balance of ball-winning smalls and the guys that get up and do the worker bee stuff like Matt Guelphy does on a consistent basis. You then go to the midfield line, and it's Sammy Draper, who's pretty much expected at this point for Essendon fans. Zach Merritt, the captain, the absolute weapon that he is, and Elijah Sardis I have on ball there, with Caldwell coming off the bench as your more defensive-minded midfielder. Other players there on the bench are Dyson Heppel if he does choose to play on. I think he's actually been putting up pretty good numbers and playing pretty well, albeit there is a point where he has to move on from the team. Harrison Jones is the other one. I think he just offers you a bit of flexibility there to be able to play a key position role or to be able to play as a sort of bigger bodied mid or wing type. Ben Hobbs, he can play as that high half forward as well, go inside 50 and come up to contest. I think really he is an inside midfielder, but can play that high half forward role. And then you've got Archie Roberts there as well, who has looked fantastic in the games that he's played, really lively, and gives them just another, sometimes just having fresh faces and just having those high energy young players around just helps you so much. So that is my lineup for Essendon. I think on paper, at least, that is a pretty good team. I think they need to shore up a few things in the game style. Like I mentioned, they need to be able to deal with those ground balls. I think the team needs to get a little bit smaller, like I've done here, just, and that brings up to another talking point there that Nick Cox is out of the team. And I just think something has to give with him a little bit. I think he has to play some VFL football for form, like I said, or maybe he does get some trade value going as well. You've got Nick Bryan there. You've got Jai Menzie. You've got Alwyn Davey as well. So I think if everybody's fit, Alwyn Davey's not quite getting into this team, but maybe that's a bit of the ammunition that he needs to be able to, kickstart his career and go to that next level. Because I think with ball in hand, he is one of their better small forwards, just probably not putting it all together at the moment. So my predictions for Essendon going into 2025, Isaac Kako wins the Rising Star Award. I think if he's deployed properly, he can be a real threat this upcoming season. Will be hard to take that away from some of the mids, but I think Kako, with the right role, can get involved in the game. He's going to be a real wow player, a real bums on seats guy for Essendon fans. I think Nate Caddy's going to really take off in his second year. Seen glimpses of it this season, but I think he'll actually be a bit more of a force to be reckoned with. Could do sort of a Jacob Van Ruin type, early season sort of breakout there, I think, for Caddy. And Harrison Jones and Nick Cox this is less of a prediction and more of just voicing my opinion. But yeah, those two players really need to either find a role for themselves or, find a niche. If it is being a swingman, just need to really knuckle down and hit that role and play consistent football in that role, because their size and their athleticism and their footballing ability does lead itself to them playing really long careers. They're really unique, versatile players, and I think they're highly talented players. I don't think they're really draft misses. They just need to find a place. Okay, guys, so that was a pretty long video. I got through it in the end. Really enjoyed doing the research for this video. I like getting down to the VFL games to check it out. Watch back a few of the old VFL tapes as well. It's nice to get a full, list experience, the full complement of a team and see everything that they've got, and you understand them a lot better. So loved that. You probably disagree with a lot of the stuff that I said. If you do, leave it in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time.